Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sandi at Suburban Homesteader WY, Arizona. And I actually have just walked in, set up the camera, because I have been picking apples. That's right. The birds have decided that they're at the perfect peak of sweetness. And it was like, I can't wait any longer. I'm picking apples. So I've hit 7 great big bags, 2 containers, and then a armfuls. But I wanted to show you something. Now, I bagged a lot of my apples. It helps if I had hail. It helps with the codling moth. It helps with birds, because definitely the ones that weren't bagged, the birds were starting to peck on. But I bag them when they're really early, so sometimes if they're close together, I should then both of them, one of the two out, but sometimes I don't. But I got to show you the funniest thing. So I had left 2 of them in there, and I had to slide it up over so there were some leaves in there. Well, as the apples got bigger, the leaves got squished between the 2 apples, and look at leaf stencils. Is that just awesome? That is just the craziest thing to me. So obviously light didn't get there. So it didn't do the photosynthesis to start turning it to turn to red. It's the original, when the apple starts to grow, is this green. I just thought that was so funny. I'm gonna take photos of it. I might even paint it. But good sized apples this year. I was happy about them. And I am gonna, actually next year my goal is to bag every apple, because it's much better to have an apple look like this than one that the birds pecked, or codling moth, the worm got in there and it's eating the inside. And I love the smell of apples. But that's not what my video is about today. No, we were talking about broth, making your own broth. And so I'm going to show you the steps that I do to make it. This time I'm actually doing chicken broth. And I hadn't cooked the chicken beforehand. A lot of times when I'm making the broth, I'm just putting the carcass in there with all my stuff. But Joe had gone and got me a chicken, beautiful chicken. And I cooked the whole thing. Then I did take the meat out of it later, and then I cooked it for my, it was between 6 and 8 hours. Usually with chicken, I like that simmer with the onions, the carrots, the celery, water, of course, the bones, and sometimes I'll put salt and pepper in there. I like to take a whole clove of garlic, cut it in half, and put both of those in. I don't even peel them. Actually, don't peel the onions either. I just slice them all in there, because I want all that nutrient. So with chicken broth, 6 to 8 hours of that simmering. If I was doing beef broth, from beef bones, easily 12 to 24 hours of simmering. Just because it just can pull all that good stuff. It's pulling proteins and vitamins and minerals and gelatin and collagen out of the bones. It's so good for you. Now, people sometimes ask, because I make broth a lot, should I take it every day? And honestly, a cup of broth a day is so good for you. It helps your digestive system. It can help your joints, your muscles, your bones, of course. It can, some people say it can be a weight control. I don't know about that, but it could. But joints and inflammation, it definitely helps. So that's kind of interesting. I have found that when I'm diligent and I have a cup of broth a day, I think my brain functions better. I think I sleep better. So we are going to go make some chicken broth. And I actually made, when I took the meat out and stuff, I took some of the broth, I added other vegetables in there, potatoes and broccoli, stuff from my garden. And we had chicken soup while the broth was just still simmering. Now, could you simmer that in a crock pot? Of course you could. but I would start it on the stove first. I think sometimes there can be an issue with crock pots, that it doesn't get to that peak temperature. Now, I don't want the broth to boil, but I want it to come right close to it, and then I turn it down and I let it simmer. And I think if there's too much in the crock pot for the size, I think it never really gets to that correct temperature. So I just would be careful. So I would do it first in a pot. When it got to the up to where it's almost that boiling point, if it boils and it makes scum, floaty stuff all over it, skim that off. You don't want that in there. It's actually just taking impurities out. And so you might as well just skim it off because you don't want that anyway. Let's go make some chicken broth. We are starting with a whole chicken, and I already have the gizzards, liver, a heart, all that stuff in the water. Usually you would cut all this fat off, but because we want to have all the gelatin, I'm going to leave all of that on there. And I'm going to put it in the water whole at first. I just want enough to cover the chicken, and by the time I get the carrots and onions in there, it will be perfect. And people around the world have always had soups. In fact, it used to be when people would stoves, there was a stock pot that was basically warming all the time, 24/7. Collagen is one of those things that kind of holds our body together. And so with the chicken and these vegetables, we can make a great broth that is filled with collagen. I cut the ends off the garlic, but I'm actually not peeling them or anything. I'm just going to throw all 3 of these in the stock. Though I'm going to chop these onions off, I'm not taking the skins off of them. I'm just coarsely chopping these. I'm not doing them fine. I'm also adding 2/3, so 2 of these, of apple cider vinegar to my concoction. So I'm just stirring this up. Now you could just use a carcass. If you'd already roasted a chicken, you could use the carcass, but I'm actually going to make some soup and some broth with this. I'm turning my burner on medium high just to get it hot, and then I'm going to simmer it for about 6 hours. I am going to bring this to a boil and get that chicken done. As soon as the chicken is all the way done, I'll take it out, take all the meat off of it, put the carcass back in, and let it simmer for about 6 hours. After around an hour or so, I took the chicken out and cut it up. Now you might ask me why I didn't cut it before I put it in there. Well, a couple of reasons. One, I don't like to cut chicken up when it isn't cooked. I don't like the feel of it, but mostly because when I go to cut it, I can cut through bones after about an hour. And I'll cook it for another hour, and I'm just simmering it now because it is going to cook for 6 hours. And I'll cut those bones up even farther. Now the broth has been cooking for about 5.5 hours. I took the main pieces of the chicken out and bagged up 2 quart bags. And then I am making also a little soup over here for our dinner tonight. And I put 3 cups of broth in, some water, the chicken. I also have cut peppers, broccolis, and mushrooms in there. I added a little bit of pepper. I didn't think I needed really salt. And that's just going to stew a little bit because there's also potatoes in here, and I need those potatoes to cook. It'll be a great supper for us. Very healthy. Back over here, I still have a few skins. I took most of the skins out. And of course, when I save this broth, I am going to filter this. So I'll get all the rest of the bones. I tried to break bones as I found them. so that marrow would come out. But when it's ready for broth, I'll actually strain it. I'll show you that. So now I'm straining it into another pot so that I can put that in the refrigerator for the evening. That way the fat will rise to the top. I can take that off, and then I'll just have the pure broth inside. So I'm just going to balance that and let it drain. So there it is. I could always strain it through a cheesecloth if I didn't want the little tiny pieces, but I'm totally okay with that. And so I'm going to put a lid on that. It's going to go into the refrigerator downstairs, and all of the fat will be solidified, and underneath will be that gelatin broth that I want. This is the fat layer, and it wasn't a lot. You know, sometimes when I make the broth, it's a lot more fat, but I'm going to use that to fry Joe's potatoes with in the morning. Well, what do you think? Is it worth a try? Definitely. Does it take some time? It does. But really, if you make it a lot, if it's just one of those things you can continually do. So you make a big batch, right? And like those two of the big half-gallon jugs, I filled 3/4 full, and they're in the freezer. The other one is in the fridge, and that's the one I'm using right now. And that way, when that's done, I can take another one out, let it unthaw, and then I have it right then. So it's not like I have to do it every single week. If you had a big family, you might have to. If everybody's having a cup of broth. If you're not feeling well, it's not going to hurt you to have 2 or 3 cups a day. It will help you. It will help your digestive system, inflammation. There are people that say it helps rheumatoid arthritis. I don't have that, so I can't answer that. There's a lot of studies out. There's a lot of good books out. And I'm going to show a picture of one of the books I think is the most well-written book on why you should make broth. It has lots of studies, lots of statistics, lots of charts, and I think it really helps you. Now, what if you don't have time? Make some broth out of those bones and just do it fast. You know, you don't have to simmer it for all those hours. Now, you will not get as many amino acids. In fact, there's charts that show at the 6 to 8 hour point, you are literally getting triple the amount of amino acids that you did when you made a fast broth. But any broth is good. And so if you're pressed for time, still make a broth. It's still going to be good for you. And one of the things I love is that our grandmothers used to make us chicken soup when we didn't feel good because it would make you better. And eureka! Science has proved it. I love it when that happens. Well, this is Sandi at Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. Tomorrow or Friday, depends on when my pumpkin gets dehydrated all the way. I am doing a pumpkin video on dehydrating a pumpkin and what to do and how to use it afterwards. So I will see you next time.